In June of 2013, a genealogist sat in a quiet archive outside New York City. Immigration records, cemetery documents, old census pages, all spread across the table in front of him. He ran the numbers once. He ran them again. Then a third time, because they didn't add up to anything he expected. The bloodline in front of him belonged to one of the most photographed women in American history, a first lady the world thought it already understood, down to her family tree. 8. That was the number staring back at him. Every one of her 8 great-great-grandparents on her mother's side traced to the same small stretch of Ireland, farming villages like Shandram and Mulla in County Clare, and towns across County Cork. For decades, the public assumed her family tree ran through a French chateau or an old Virginia plantation. The paper trail this genealogist was holding pointed somewhere else entirely. A famine-era emigrant ship and a woman nobody in high society ever wanted to talk about. Her name was Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. The genealogist's name was Jim O'Callahan, and the documents in front of him were about to undo everything the world thought it knew about her. And the twist went further than her own family tree. Jackie Kennedy turned out to have deeper Irish roots than her own husband, President John F. Kennedy, the man everyone thought of as the Irish one. O'Callahan didn't trust one lucky find. He checked it against something else. He pulled the 1900 U.S. Census. He matched it to church records from Ireland. He matched that to a gravestone sitting in a cemetery in Queens. 3 separate records, 3 different sources, all of them saying the same thing. This took him a full year. O'Callahan spent 12 months working through archives in Boston, New York, and Ireland before he was ready to publish. When he did, the Sunday Times covered it. That gravestone is real. It sits in Calvary Cemetery in Queens in a section called Plot 10. It says, in plain writing, that 2 people named Thomas Merritt and Maria Curry were both born in County Clare, Ireland. The 1900 census backs that up. So does a school record from Sweetbriar College in Virginia from 1925, the exact place where this whole cover-up got its start on paper. This story has 2 halves, and both halves are going to surprise you. If you like digging through old paperwork for secrets exactly like this one, subscribe now, because it only gets stranger from here. The first half is about science, about a kind of DNA that almost never lies, and why it made this cover-up impossible to keep secret forever. The second half is about a real person, a woman in Jackie's own family who was hidden away and told to stay out of sight whenever guests came over. For 50 years, people believed something specific about Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. She was sold to the public as old money and European. Magazines, newspapers, biographies all repeated the same idea. She came from noble blood on both sides of her family. On her father's side, that story came from her grandfather, Major John Verneau Bouvier, Jr. In 1940, he paid to publish his own family history called Our Forebears. In it, he claimed the Bouvier came from French noblemen. It wasn't true. Records at the Immigration Archive show the real Bouvier who came to America, a man named Michel Bouvier, was a cabinet maker, someone who builds furniture by hand, and a veteran of Napoleon's own army. He left France in 1815 after Napoleon's final defeat, with nothing but his tools and a trade. He built a good business in lumber and real estate in Philadelphia. His children and grandchildren invented the nobleman part later. Then there's her mother's side, the Lee family. Jackie's mother, Janet Norton Lee, went to Sweetbriar College in Virginia. She noticed something. Her last name opened doors. So she started telling her rich classmates that her family came from the famous Lees of Virginia, the same family as Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general, and Richard Henry Lee, who signed the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't true, but people believed it because Lee really was her last name. That's the trick. You take one small true fact and let it carry the rest of the story for you. To keep the story airtight, the family scrubbed their own paperwork. When Janet's father, James T. Lee, became vice president of Chase Manhattan Bank, his official biography left out any mention of Ireland, as if that part of his life never happened. After Janet divorced Jackie's father, she married a wealthy oil heir named Hugh Auchincloss. She also left the Catholic Church and joined the Episcopal Church, the same church as the Virginia family she wanted people to think she came from. The writer Gore Vidal knew the family well. They shared a stepfather. He later said their claims of noble blood were nonsense. In his words, they were pretty lowly born, dressed up to sound like kings and queens. The family had erased their real Irish Catholic history so completely that they left a strange gap behind, and other people filled that gap with rumors of their own. For years, rivals and gossips, including Jackie's own cousin Little Edie Beale from the documentary Grey Gardens, whispered that the Lee family's real name used to be Levy and that they were secretly Jewish. That rumor was false, too. The family let it spread anyway. A false rumor about one hidden identity was safer than the true one. The same trick worked twice. Jackie really was 1/8 French through the Bouvier, so the family leaned hard into French lessons, a French university, and French fashion, letting that small true fact hide the bigger one. She was 50% Irish Catholic. So that's what people believed. French nobility on one side, Virginia gentry on the other, printed in magazines, repeated at dinner parties. None of it could survive one single strand of DNA. To understand why the DNA evidence is so hard to argue with, you need to understand one kind of DNA, mitochondrial DNA. This is simpler than it sounds. Most of your DNA sits inside the center of your cells in a part called the nucleus. That DNA is a mix, half from your mother, half from your father. It gets shuffled every generation. That's why brothers and sisters can look so different from each other. Mitochondrial DNA is different. It lives outside the nucleus in tiny parts of the cell called mitochondria, and it follows one rule only. It passes from mother to child, unchanged, generation after generation. Sons inherit it too, but they can't pass it on to their own kids. Only daughters carry it forward. No husband, no in-law, no outsider who marries into the family can touch it, change it, or add their name to it. Regular DNA fades fast. You only carry about 6% of a great-great-grandparent's DNA. Mitochondrial DNA doesn't fade. It gets passed down whole every single time. The unbroken maternal line running through Jackie Kennedy's own body traced straight back to a famine refugee from County Clare, Ireland, not a French palace, not a Virginia plantation. Her name was Maria Curry. Maria Curry is the center of this whole story. She's the woman who was erased on paper and the woman whose body refused to let that erasure stick. She was born in August 1839 in a small parish called Kilmurry-Ibracane, near the villages of Shandram and Mulla in West Clare, Ireland. She grew up during the worst years of Ireland's Great Famine between 1845 and 1852. The famine brought starvation, disease, and mass evictions to that part of Ireland. Whole villages emptied out. Even Maria's own mother is a ghost in the record. She was born sometime between 1810 and 1820, somewhere in County Clare, and no American document ever caught her name. The mitochondrial thread that eventually reached Jackie Kennedy and reaches Caroline Kennedy today started with a woman history never bothered to write down at all. In the early 1850s, still young, Maria got on a ship and left for New York. She was one of hundreds of thousands of Irish famine refugees who made that same trip that decade. In Manhattan, she married another Irish Catholic immigrant from County Clare, a man named Thomas Merritt. They lived in cheap tenement housing, the kind most immigrant families lived in back then. Life was hard. Thomas worked as a laborer. Then, on November 27, 1883, he died. He was 42 years old. Maria was left a widow, raising her children alone, in a city that treated Irish Catholics with open hostility. Maria's daughter, Margaret Merritt, grew up in that same tough world. She married an ambitious young lawyer named James T. Lee, the man who would later build 740 Park Avenue, one of the most exclusive addresses in New York City. James T. Lee had climbed out of an immigrant family himself. He earned degrees from CCNY and Columbia Law. He built the kind of wealth that opens doors into Protestant high society. That's exactly when Maria Curry became a problem. By then, Maria was an older woman. She spoke with a thick West Clare accent. She didn't match the old money image her family was trying to sell. So according to historical biographers, whenever guests visited the family's Park Avenue apartment or their summer home in East Hampton, Maria Curry was sent upstairs, out of sight, for the whole visit. Guests walked through those rooms believing one thing. They thought they were standing in the home of old English Protestant money. Meanwhile, the one woman in that house who actually carried the family's bloodline sat in a room above their heads, waiting for the visit to end. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It happened again and again for years, a decision made on purpose by people calculating exactly what Maria's presence would cost them socially. That calculation is the real engine behind this whole story. In the late 1800s, New York high society ran on harsh anti-Irish, anti-Catholic prejudice. For a family trying to climb into that world, an Irish famine grandmother was a threat to everything they'd built. The family didn't push back against that prejudice. They gave into it. They hid her. The erasure went further than the front door. It made its way into the official record, too. James T. Lee's biography in the National Cyclopedia of American Biography described his banking career and his real estate empire in full detail. It left out the names of his own parents, Thomas Lee and Mary Norton. It left out the names of his wife's parents, Thomas Merritt and Maria Curry, completely. A man built his entire public legacy on top of a blank space where his grandmother should have been. Maria Curry died on February 4th, 1928 in Manhattan, the same city she had crossed an ocean to reach as a young woman, and the same city where she spent her final years being led upstairs before company arrived. She was 88 years old. That same year, her daughter Margaret also died. Two women who carried the family's real bloodline, gone within months of each other, in a city that never once let either of them stand in the room when it mattered. Compare that to the other side of the family. Major Bouvier didn't hide his ancestors. He paid to publish an entire book celebrating a fake version of them. One side of the family got a hardcover book full of invented French nobility. The other side got cut out of an encyclopedia and sent upstairs whenever company came. That's who got remembered and who got erased. The choice came down to what looked good at a Park Avenue dinner party. Jackie found out the truth herself, which makes this even more remarkable. In the early 1950s, not long after she graduated from George Washington University, Jackie Bouvier traveled to Europe. She stopped in Ireland. While she was in County Cork, she looked through old land records. What she found there directly contradicted her mother's story. The land records showed famine refugees who fled Cork and Clare in the 1840s, the same journey Maria Curry made. Jackie said nothing. During the 1960 presidential campaign, she let the public keep believing the French aristocracy story. Telling the truth would have meant facing her mother's fury. It would have complicated the image the Kennedy campaign had built around the White House. The most photographed woman in America knew privately that her real roots led straight back to a hidden immigrant grandmother. She chose to let the myth stand. This is where the cover-up finally runs out of road. Paper can be rewritten, A reputation can be managed and polished. Biology doesn't take orders from anyone's social ambitions. Follow the thread all the way down, generation by generation. Maria Curie to Margaret Merritt, Margaret Merritt to Janet Norton Lee, Janet Norton Lee to Jacqueline Lee Bouvier, Jacqueline Lee Bouvier to Caroline Kennedy, Caroline Kennedy to Rose and Tatiana Schlossberg. 6 generations, one unbroken biological line, running underneath a century and a half of weddings, name changes, and invented family trees. One honest note before we get there. No lab has published a direct mitochondrial DNA test on Jackie Kennedy's living relatives. Results like that stay private. What we do have is just as solid on paper, unbroken civil records, church registries, and cemetery documents connecting every generation in this chain, from Maria Curie all the way to Caroline Kennedy, without a single gap. Jackie's daughter, Ambassador Caroline Kennedy, carries that exact same DNA. It's the DNA Maria Curie brought across the ocean during the famine. Caroline passed it to her 2 daughters, Rose Schlossberg and Tatiana Schlossberg. The marker one family spent generations hiding in an upstairs bedroom now sits, unchanged, inside 2 women often called American diplomatic royalty. This line survives in a strange way. Caroline's son, Jack Schlossberg, inherited that same mitochondrial marker from his mother. But this kind of DNA only travels through daughters. He can't pass it on to his own kids. This one biological thread now depends entirely on his sisters, Rose and Tatiana. The marker Maria Curie carried out of a famine-torn village in West Clare could disappear from this branch of the family within a generation or 2, unless it keeps traveling through daughters, the way it always has. The line didn't stop with Jackie's own kids either. Jackie's sister, Lee Radziwill, carried that exact same DNA. She passed it to her own daughter, Princess Anna Christina Radziwill. That hidden bloodline sits inside more than one branch of one of America's most photographed families. Maria Curie's own family spent decades trying to erase her. They hid her upstairs, left her name out of the official record, and let a fake fancy story stand in her place. High society welcomed the finished result as the ultimate insider. By the plain math of bloodlines, though, she was rooted in exactly the immigrant working class her own family spent a fortune trying to hide. The elegant French and Virginia story built to replace her fell apart the moment somebody actually checked the paperwork. If you've made it this far, you already know why stories like this matter to me. I dig through the paperwork so the real people behind these families don't stay buried. If you want more of these deep dives, DNA, and old documents hiding behind famous names, go ahead and hit subscribe. There's a lot more coming. It was Maria Curie's own DNA that finally brought her back into the story. Her family spent 3 generations trying to erase her. DNA was the one thing nobody could edit, scrub, or send upstairs. One line in a dusty record book could do that to her. So whose story is still buried right now, sitting in some living descendant's cells, waiting for a test that hasn't been run yet? If this kind of hidden history reveal is your thing, make sure you're subscribed. And let me know in the comments, whose family tree do you think deserves this kind of digging next?